Well, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Stalo Nation and the Stalo tribes. And I am, and I think we are grateful for the stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. And so I acknowledge the elders of the past, present, and future of the Stalo Nation. I do that because that's what we should be doing when we do these meetings, but I do that also because some of our biggest partners in addressing issues around homelessness and any kind of social issues are actually the Indigenous organizations in town and many of the Stalo communities. So I'm very grateful for their relationships and partnerships. What I want to do right now is just give a little bit of background to the homelessness circumstances that we find ourselves in the city of Chilliwack. I've done this before at other presentations, so if you've seen this, it might be some familiar information. If not, then hopefully it's some new information. And so I'll just present some information up here and kind of explain it as we go through. So homelessness is obviously an issue that's at the forefront of many people's minds in Chilliwack. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. There's reasons why we have the homelessness crisis that we're in, and a lot of it is related to the housing crisis that we find ourselves in. So we have a near 0% vacancy rate in Chilliwack. The last official number I saw was 1.5%, but I think that was based off of old numbers. Any kind of anecdotal information that I get from landlords or from tenants is that they receive 20 to 30 applications for one particular unit, and that seems to be the par across the board. We have a lack of market rental inventory development over several years, although that's beginning to change. It's starting to try and catch up with the demand. We have a city that's over 90,000 people now. That wasn't that way 5-10 years ago. So that's that third point, growing city population. Rental homes are being purchased as primary residences, which of course is absolutely fine. People that move out from further west looking for more affordable housing in order to purchase, they're coming to Chilliwack, where it's more affordable than downtown Vancouver and Vancouver. And so what were rental houses are now being purchased as primary residences. And so those people now need to find somewhere to rent, and without enough rental units being made available and the prices of those rental units going up, there are folks that are just finding nowhere to find a place to live. In fact, I just had a meeting yesterday with a landlord that we're working with through our program, and her own son and girlfriend currently cannot find anywhere to live. And there is no reason. They have the ability financially to pay, they have the ability to work, and they just cannot find anywhere to rent. So it's not just folks that are struggling with social issues, it's many, many people, of everyday people. So rental homes, I said, are purchased as primary residences. There's a lack of low barrier, affordable, and supportive housing, which is changing. It's changing rapidly. We have programs that are coming in the next year or that have already started, and so those will keep coming, and there's more on the horizon that haven't already been announced. We also see higher rent prices, so increased costs of developing market rent inventory. It costs more to buy land, it costs more to build. Increased cost of purchasing real estate for rental income purposes. So someone might buy a house now in order to use it as a rental, but now the mortgage that they have to cover is much higher than what it was 5 years ago, so now they have to charge much more in rent. There's a high demand with low supply, so that whole idea of supply and demand. There's stagnant wages, particularly those that are on any kind of income assistance. A person that's on income assistance receives $710 a month, and their housing portion is $375. So there is nothing out there that can be rented for $375. Lack of affordable housing inventory is a significant contributor, and that again is also being worked on. Some of these numbers we're about to go through comes from the point-in-time homeless count. So this is a survey that was done in the spring of 2017, and this information is what we base a lot of what we know about our homelessness population. And this is strictly Chilliwack numbers. These numbers don't come from Abbotsford or Hope. This is strictly Chilliwack. So the number of homelessness in Chilliwack increased from 73 in 2014 to 221 in 2017. Most of the outreach workers, in fact, all of them that I've spoken to, feel like that number 221 is low because there's folks that are sleeping on a friend's couch in a family's extra bedroom or office. They're called hidden homeless. You don't see them on the streets, you can't find them, and so they weren't captured in this. So they figure that it could be anywhere north of 300 in terms of folks that are actually homeless in Chilliwack. Of the 221 current homeless people that were captured in the survey, 68.6% will be considered chronically homeless. And according to the federal government, that means being homeless for 6 months or more in a given calendar year. And this just kind of gives us an idea of pie chart of exactly what's happening with our homeless folks. So over 1 year is 50% of our homeless population in terms of being homeless for over a year. And that is way, way higher than the national average. I think the national average is like 4 or 5%. 1 year is, so for 6 months to 1 year is 18.2%, 1 to 6 months is 19%, and less than 1 month is 11.7%. In terms of who the homeless are in Chilliwack, 62% are male, 37% female, 58% have been in some kind of ministry care, which usually means involvement with foster care of some sort, which is obviously a very high number, which basically tells us that there's something going on in those childhood experiences that's leading to something that results in homelessness later on in life. 43% of our homeless population is Indigenous, and considering that only 9% of Chilliwack's total population is Indigenous, they're obviously way overrepresented in the homeless population. 70% of our homeless folks struggle with addiction, 46% with mental illness, and the ages of Chilliwack's homeless are diverse, but the two groups, the largest groups, and this always kind of gets me, is our largest group at 21.5% is the 40 to 49 year age bracket, but also the 15 to 19-year-olds age bracket. So it means youth, children, are amongst our highest population of homeless folks in our overall general population. The homeless in Chilliwack predominantly start out as residents in Chilliwack. Almost 70% have lived in Chilliwack for 6 years or more, or 80% of those who have been residents for 2 to 5 years are included. And this dispels the notion that someone is shipping homeless people from somewhere else to our town. I don't know where that myth started or how it keeps getting mentioned, but the vast majority of our homeless population started as housed residents in Chilliwack and then became homeless later on in life. So these are our neighbors that are becoming homeless in Chilliwack. There we go. So reasons for becoming homeless. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you'll notice the top two at the very top are rent is too high, income is too low. The third one is also obviously substances or addictions. And then there's a whole whole bunch of other reasons why people become homeless. On the right-hand side, it is folks who are dealing with some sort of issue or barrier and their ability to get access to help for it. So of the folks that are homeless in Chilliwack, 70% identified as having some sort of addiction. But when you take that 70%, when you take that population struggling with addiction, while they're homeless, only 36% of them can access services to actually deal with that addiction. In terms of a medical condition, 37% of our homeless population has some sort of medical condition. Again, of that 37%, only 13% of them can actually access services to deal with that particular medical condition. If it's a mental illness, which is 46% of our homeless population in terms of what they're dealing with, then of those that have a mental illness, only 17% can access services. And with a physical disability, which is over a quarter of our homeless population, of that quarter of our population, only 7% of them are able to access any kind of services. So what this basically leads us to understand is that reasons why people become homeless are often because of addiction, a medical condition, a mental illness, or physical disability, but then their ability to address that issue that caused them to be homeless in the first place is nearly impossible, because it's very difficult to access services while you do not have a fixed address, while you do not have a place to go back to. If you're going and seeking counseling for addiction, often what you're seeking counseling for is some form of trauma. So if you go to trauma counseling and then leave and go have to try and survive for the next 5 or 6 or 7 nights, and you come back to counseling by living day to day, trying to keep safe, trying to find something to eat, trying to find a place to stay warm or cool or dry, you cannot work on the things that need to be worked on in order to address that trauma that's going on in your life. So it makes it very, very difficult to get out of the cycle of homelessness if a person is caught in homelessness. One of the biggest causes of any kind of substance use, whether it's alcohol or some form of drug use, is adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences are basically anything that's considered a traumatic experience. It could be a parental divorce, it could be a parent that's incarcerated, it could be an absent parent, it could be substance use in the home, it could be violence in the home, basically anything that would cause any kind of adverse childhood experience. And if the research has shown that if 6 of those experiences occur in a boy's life, while he's growing up, if 6 of those incidents occur in a boy's life, he's 46 times more likely to be involved in some kind of substance abuse. So it just basically helps us understand that when a person experiences repeated traumas in childhood, it leads to unhealthy and difficult behavior later on in life, where they get caught in the cycles of addictions or end up caught in cycles of homelessness. And this is a quote from a man named Gabor Mate, who has done extensive research on homelessness and addiction, and himself is a substance use therapist. This is his quote. He says, "I don't have a single female patient in the downtown east side in Vancouver who wasn't sexually abused, as were many of the men, or abused, neglected, and abandoned serially over and over and over again." And that's what set up the brain biology of addiction. In other words, the addiction is related both psychologically in terms of emotional pain relief and neurobiological development to early adversity. When he's talking about neurobiological development, what he's talking about is actually early childhood adverse experiences actually create different kinds of brain chemistry and can reshape brain chemistry and brain synapses. So it actually has a biological effect on how brains develop. And as a result of that, it creates needs to fill chemicals that should be already being produced in the brain that aren't produced because of the trauma. And so that in order to make up for that, then that's where substances end up coming into play. So it actually affects a person's neurobiological, actual brain development in addition to their own emotional healthiness. And so what we're trying to do tonight, and what we've always are trying to do as outreach workers or in the job that I have, is we're trying to move our thinking from what's wrong with them, which is a place of judgment, to what happened to them, a place of understanding. And every person who's homeless has a story. And this is probably something you all know and you hear, and if you take a second to think about it, you already know this. But the folks that are going to come up in a moment and kind of share their stories of what they do as outreach workers are going to share with you their experiences of working with folks that are homeless and the things that the homeless folks have taught them. And then they'll share a bit of just practical information. So one of the things that I do, my job right now is a housing hub coordinator, and what we're doing at PCRS is we have basically a pilot project that we've launched for a year. It's a housing first systems approach to addressing homelessness in Chilliwack, which is just basically a fancy way of saying there are lots of resources and lots of organizations and lots of people out in Chilliwack that want to help address this issue of homelessness. And so what we're trying to do is provide a practical way in which we can partner with all kinds of people in Chilliwack in order to actually help people find housing. We're doing it based on the 5 principles of housing first. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, I'll run through it really quickly. So the first principle is obviously housing. We're trying to provide people immediate access to housing as quickly as possible with very limited barriers. In other words, they don't necessarily have to be clean and sober. They don't necessarily have to be on a medication regimen before they get housed, because as those numbers showed, it's almost impossible for a person to get on a medication regimen, to deal with a physical disability, to deal with addiction while they're homeless. So we provide housing first. That's why it's called housing first. But it's not housing only. The second principle is choice. So we talk to them about their personal goals. What do you want to work on? Well, I want a place to live. Okay, now you got a place to live. Well, now I want to work on my mental health stuff, or I want to work on my physical disability, or I'm sick, or I want to reconnect with family. And so we listen to them and learn what they want to do, and we help them do those things. Recover. So recover is, yes, it's recovery from substance abuse, but it may also be recovery physically. Recovery is a holistic thing, the recovery of the whole person. Fourthly, support. So we provide individualized and person-driven supports. All that means basically is we listen to them and we support them in meeting their goals and becoming a healthy whole person. And then finally, community. We reconnect them to social and community relationships. So get them involved in community activities. If they used to like to hike, we connect them to a hiking group. If they are feeling isolated, we connect them to people where they can have healthy relationships, going for coffee, things like that. And the way this is happening is through this model. I could spend a lot of time explaining this model, but I'm not going to. I'm going to talk about basically 2 basic things. One is my role as a housing hub coordinator is to connect with landlords, and is to, so either we're going to be renting directly from a landlord who has an apartment for rent. And so in case, what will happen there is the individual who we're trying to house, their name will be on the tenant agreement, but we have a program agreement with that individual where we show up in their unit at least once a week. So again, they're not in there on their own. We show up once a week, a minimum. The person we're housing right now, we're showing up twice a week. Just to help them get settled in, help them access services in the community, help them get the furniture they need, the food they need, all those kinds of things. That way the landlord knows, hey, I can only go there once a month, but these people are going in there at least once a week, if not twice a week. So we're keeping eyes on their place, but also helping that person be a successful tenant. And then in the other model, the congregant housing program, what that means is we rent a house from a landlord. And instead of the tenant's name being on the tenant agreement, PCRS's name, the organization I work for, their name is on the tenant agreement. So we guarantee rent, we guarantee to cover the cost of damages. Maintenance is maybe a shared thing between between us as PCRS and the landlord, or if it's just genuine, regular maintenance stuff, then they'll cover that because that's what a landlord does. But basically, if there's any kind of damages caused by our tenants, then we cover the cost of that. So what we try to do is eliminate as much of the risk from the landlord as possible. And then what we do, if it's, let's say it's a 5-bedroom house, then every bedroom will have its own locking door, and each tenant will have their own private bedroom with a locking door, and then have shared living and kitchen space. So we can house 5 people in a house. And again, we are there minimum once a week for each individual. So if there's 5 people there, we're there a minimum of 5 days a week. So again, landlord cannot do that, but we can because it's a housing program. It's not a tenant agreement in that particular situation. It's a housing program agreement that we have with the individual tenants. So that's basically what we're doing. And if a person that gets referred to us, we can't house in either the first model or their name's on the tenancy agreement, or we can't house them in a house that we've rented, then we refer them on to the best kind of housing that suits them in our community, because there's lots of different housing models coming to Chilliwack. So if we can't house them and they're best suited somewhere else, we refer them on to that. I would be happy to answer any more questions about this afterwards. I just want to give you a quick update on what we're doing. We have basically 2 staff that are working with PCRS directly. So I'm the Housing Hub Coordinator. Alicia, who will be speaking here in a moment, is one of our housing support facilitators. Stolo Service Agency, which is an Indigenous organization, has essentially given us a half-time worker to work with us. So they pay their salary, but they work for us like they're one of our staff. And we have another Indigenous organization that's given us 2 staff to kind of cover if one of us is sick. So again, this is all about All Society, Stolo Service Agency, and PCRS all working together in order to be able to help house people who are currently homeless.